I'm David Karandish, the co-founder of Prepare.ai and the co-founder and CEO of Jane AI. Thank you all for coming out today. First of all, who here this is your first time at a Prepare.ai conference? Let's get a show of hands. Awesome. Round of applause for coming out and checking us out here. So first off, I want to thank our sponsors. Slalom has been instrumental in us getting this conference off the ground. Microsoft, Tableau, Intel. We've got a great round of sponsors here. Big round of applause for them for helping to put this conference on. Subsidize the ticket price so we can keep the ticket prices as low as possible. All right, so one of the questions, the second thing I want to bring up is our ecosystem partners, Launch Code and Arch Grants, have also been instrumental in just getting this conference off the ground. So one of the questions I want to talk about here for a moment is why Prepare.ai? So I'll give you 3 reasons why we started this organization about 1.5 years ago. The first is that we saw the rise of this AI tsunami happening in both the United States and around the globe. And we saw that most of the conferences that were being held were in Boston or Austin or San Francisco or Denver. And we looked at it and said, St. Louis needs to be on the map for this technology if we want to be a rising city. The second reason why we started this is that we realized that people need help in transitioning toward an AI-centered economy. And so we put on both conferences like this as well as meetups around the city to help people prepare for that next wave of technological change. And then the third reason is that it's just a lot of fun. You're going to see a lot of fun speakers today. You're going to see a lot of fun tech. We believe that work should be something that is gratifying and glorifying and something where you can use this technology for the better of man and woman. So I want to talk a little bit about the state of artificial intelligence. And we're going to talk about 3 things today that you're going to get to see in the conference. The first is validation. So when I first got into the AI world about 2.5 years ago, the market for artificial intelligence software was somewhere around 2 to 3 billion. The estimates for where this market is going, by 2025, we are going to be at 110 billion worldwide in terms of overall artificial intelligence software. So if you're wondering, is this thing real? Is this a fad? This is not the Furby of technology. This is here to stay. So you're going to see a lot of people talk about validating the space over the course of the next few hours. The second thing you're going to see is navigation. How do we navigate the landscape? There are a few companies out there that claim to be working in AI. We collected a nice smorgasbord of them up here. So how in the world do you navigate the landscape when so many companies are using artificial intelligence to move things forward? We're going to talk about that throughout the sessions today. And then the third big nugget is experimentation. So we here in St. Louis, first of all, who here is from out of town? Let's do a quick show of hands. Awesome. Thank you all for coming into our great city today for Prepare. We're in the show me state. So we're in a state where we want to see results. This is not a theoretical conference where people are going to get up and talk about what the world is going to be like 30 or 40 years from now. You want to see exactly how people are actually using this technology today to make an impact on their businesses and on the world. So you're going to get to see a great set of speakers up here. This is the best looking set of speakers I've ever seen at an AI conference. But we've got over 50 speakers. The hardest part about this conference is actually just choosing which track you want to go to because we've got such a great talented roster. Lastly, I want to do a quick thank you to Cindy Teasdale and Dave Costanero. Cindy and Dave, stand up. Cindy and Dave have worked tirelessly to pull this thing off, including taking care of parking accommodations. Thank you all for being flexible. We got a little bit of the rug pulled out from us at the end on Friday night on parking, so thank you all for being flexible, and thank you, Dave and Cindy, for just making this an awesome event. It is with my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today. So Tony Sardella is the founder of Evolve 24. He's got a 30-year career in the decision sciences, predictive analytics. He's a speaker and professor at Washington University, and he's here to talk with us today about how we can ethically apply artificial intelligence and its related technologies in the workplace. Tony.
Thanks so much, David. Thank you, David, and it's a real delight to be here. And I looked at the various participants, the companies, the researchers, and I was just incredibly overwhelmed at all the amazing things that many of you are doing with AI and the applications that you're putting AI into to better both businesses and society at large. My background for some of you is a little bit, I would say, off the path of what you would expect for someone to talk about AI. My background's as a toxicologist. I spent a great part of my career, an early part of my life, doing risk assessments. I developed risk assessment methodologies when there weren't any for organizations like the World Health and the FDA. How do you assess chemicals, agricultural chemicals, drugs, for their safety? The whole idea there, for many of you who are from the medical and drug industry, may remember thalidomide, to never let that happen again in regards to assessing its risks. You know, as I was embarking on that path, I was hit after about a decade with all this incredible work we were doing to assess risk and safety of all these new technologies and products and even techniques, that it didn't matter. The math around risk assessment did not matter. What mattered more in regards to whether these technologies and new novel innovations would be adopted and accepted was people's perceptions of risk. Perceptions of risk. And so it redirected a great path in a new area. In fact, the National Academy of Sciences found this so instrumental in regards to adoption and realization of new innovations and technologies in society. They put special task force to study what drives perception of risk if it's not equivalent to the real risk. So it has widespread implications for public health and adoption of other technologies. And so I started a path to understand this, a path that many others have also researched, a couple notable ones, Paul Slovak, who some of you may know, or Baruch Fishkoff, and one that's become more popular in mainstream literature, Daniel Kahneman, who studies behavioral economics as to why do people make decisions. And so I founded a company called Evolve24 that focused on this back in 2003. And I still remember, because we used a lot of AI in our methodologies back then, I think back and think, what was I thinking? 15 years ago, telling people how these techniques, these mathematical pattern recognition, machine learning techniques could help you understand things in a more effective manner. And the work was focused on three key elements to understand why people perceived things the way they did. The first, how does your brain work? How does your brain process information? How does it, either peripherally or centrally, receive that information and affect what you do and how you behave? Second part we used algorithmic techniques for is to understand people's psychology, their state, their fears, their perceptions, their beliefs, by looking at the language they use to reveal it. In fact, that research now is even going to understand linguistical markers for suicide, depression, OCD, and other type of psychological disorders or conditions. And then the third part was using AI and machine learning techniques to understand behavior. The judgment. When you have all this information, your brain is processing a certain way, you then are in a particular state, you have certain beliefs, then how do you judge that information to make decisions, the field of behavioral economics? And our focus has been on taking all those and then predicting trends of acceptance and adoption, or barriers to adoption and acceptance of these incredible technologies many of you are working with and trying to commercialize or bring to applications for better of business and society. And so we embarked on getting to the heart, using all of these different techniques of AI, as to why things get accepted and why others get derailed. So what's different about AI? What's different about AI? What makes it? There's been a lot of technologies, back from steam engine, right? Combustible engine. Why is it so different? And the reality is the question is different. It's not what's different about AI. It's what's different about society today versus when these historical technologies came into play and got introduced. So we embarked on a study with all of our data scientists and decision scientists, and we took a decade of information that had been shared publicly, communications, and looked at all those communications that were available digitally, and started to understand the language they were using, the emotions they were using, to look at the shift that was occurring in society, the shift by which these new technologies like AI would be getting introduced into society. And you saw some very interesting things. You can see some of the key words, right? On the top right, what you're seeing are words and language that are dominant and increasing over this decade. What you're seeing on the bottom left are words and language that are decreasing in the amount and the discussion that occurs. And there's a pattern. There's a pattern that jumps out mathematically, statistically in all this review. We are now operating, when we commercialize a technology like AI, in an extremely heightened state of concern and fear among society. We fear the aspect of trusting organizations and institutions to be competent and responsible to bring these technologies into society. And if you look at one of the most significantly emotional words that has emerged over the last decade of conversation, what jumps out at you is the word automated, automation, right? Which is one element of AI. We know AI has many different components. It's a suite of technologies from robotics and human engineering and machine learning and deep learning. But it comes out. The message there is that as you embark on applying and as well commercializing applications of AI, you are operating now in an environment of high concern and low trust for institutions, for companies, for research, compared to historically when technologies and other innovations are being commercialized. It's a fundamental different state. So what's changed compared to past innovations that have been brought forward is that society has changed. Their view and their concerns have become incredibly heightened. So now imagine researchers in AI working. I see a few smiles. How many know what Norman is? Yeah. I will put a disclaimer after this. If you go search it, it is disturbing, very disturbing. So imagine researchers and data scientists working to develop new techniques of understanding and new models and introducing these types into a societal environment of great concern and distrust. So let me share what Norman is. MIT did a research study using mass amounts of data from Reddit, and they trained what in essence is the first psychopath. They trained computers to learn from data that was in forums and discussions of death, destruction, harm, very disturbing kind of imagery and disturbing type of events. So what occurred is, as Norman got trained, he was incredibly, biased towards seeing death, destruction in everything he processed and he looked at. And so when you and I would look at a picture of a vase and flowers or a vase and flowers, we would see vase and flowers. Norman would see death, destruction, killings. He was trained that way. Now you might say, well, they trained it poorly. They used the wrong data. But the ability to train a machine and an algorithm in that manner that then has the potential to make decisions and take actions across a multitude of different environments from military and elsewhere is quite concerning. Right? And it's being launched into an environment where already society is saying we can't trust institutions to be safe and to think of consequences. The next one in the middle, many of you may know OpenAI. Are you familiar with that program? So there's a program called OpenAI. And they developed an algorithm. Elon Musk used to be part of it. He's since left the organization, but they put forward different AI codes openly for people to use. And in doing so, they developed an algorithm, and there was a problem with this algorithm. It was really, really good. In fact, it was so good, it could pick up on language patterns for people or other type of outlets so concisely and precisely that you weren't able to understand if you were being manipulated or influenced in ways psychologically that you were unaware of. The patterns of communication were incredibly accurate and precise. Now, we talk about fake news and disinformation campaigns. At this point, those are absolutely embryonic compared to what could be achieved through AI of that nature. So they didn't release it. They did not release it because they recognized the implications of such AI being put forth. And the last one is commercializing these technologies in an environment where 9 companies are viewed to own virtually all the patents, all the technologies. So you can see how something that has so much promise and so much potential could be completely perceived as very fearful, very scary. And by the way, perception equals reality, and it's real in its consequences. Many of you are technical background. And when I talk to like-minded toxicologists and scientists, the hardest thing for them to understand is why do people get so scared and why do they act that way? And for those in the risk assessment, when you start putting in all a series of psychological factors, the risk to them is absolute, certain, 1-to-1, that someone's going to get harmed. It's not 1 in a million. It's not 1 in a trillion. It's 1-to-1. It's certain. So many of these type of programs drive these kind of psychological fears. So we look at all the language, we do use machine learning, and we extract from it these factors. These are not ones we invented. These are ones derived from the National Academy of Sciences for risk perception. And what we find is these are the ones, and by the way, they are by far the most potent suite that we've seen when we've studied issues over 30, 40, and sometimes gone back even 45, 50 years to understand issues historically. And look at their fingerprints or footprints as to what's the psychological factors that are driving fear and concern. This is one of the most potent, which scores incredibly high on so many of the variables. First and foremost, human versus natural. Psychologically, neurologically, when we see something that is man-made versus occurring naturally in environment or society, our fear increases. Why? Well, I used to do environmental impact assessments. There's a lot of checks and balances ecologically. When humans introduce new technologies and innovations, it's unprecedented. It's never been there before. The checks and balances may not be there. Right? The safeguards may not be there because the unintended consequences are not really known until it's been implemented and been in society for a while. You know, ecology has had thousands and thousands of years to develop and evolve. But these new technologies come into introduction aren't known the consequences. The second one is fairness. Now, when you have these different technologies, someone benefits and someone benefits less or is harmed. So there's aspects of fairness around robotics. Who gets jobs? Who loses them? Where does the income and wealth get created? Is it equal? Is it aggregate to certain sectors of society? Those are fairness questions, and the more fairness concerns emerge, and these are from the language of people talking about AI, the more the risk and fears increase. And by the way, that fairness is not just in job displacement. That fairness comes out also as to when you write your algorithms, right? Let me give you an example, and we'll touch on it. When you're writing some of these algorithms and defining them, how do you decide in your algorithm who's going to benefit and who's not going to benefit as much? The writing of the algorithm, the data that goes into those algorithms results in some fairness issues, which we'll touch on even a little bit later. Reversibility is the third. Can you reverse it if it gets commercialized and something goes wrong? Are those consequences irreversible? The more irreversible they are, the more they can't be pulled back, the more fear occurs. And what's interesting about this is when we look at different technologies and look at different products, usually 4 or 5 dominate. This technology lights up virtually every psychological factor. There's 19 of them, by the way, and it lights up virtually all of them significantly. Now, as I start discussing this, you start thinking, well, what's the future then? Will this, is it, is it a Furby? Will it be derailed? Or is this going to take hold? The future of AI and your use of AI will be dependent on responsible stewardship of the technology, right? It will be dependent on the responsible stewardship of the technology. We've compared it. We do life cycle projections of how technologies emerge, interest occurs, research develops, new products get launched, and then get adopted into a multitude. The ability for AI not to become a niche technology only used in certain areas is dependent on you as practitioners and industry and researchers and your responsible stewardship of the technology. Now, you might think, well, it's got a long way to go. It'll eventually get hold. It'll come to pass because of all of its benefits. We have a real life story right here in St. Louis with one of the world's greatest companies in regards to ag biotech, Monsanto. When Monsanto tried to launch agricultural biotech, genetically modified organisms, for the betterment of society, better food, more food, decreased drought, resistance to insects and pesticides, less use of those harmful chemicals to the environment, you would think that would be widely accepted, right? The risks were low, the benefit to society significant. It should have been a cakewalk. Then why in its early introduction did Europe ban it and put a moratorium? Right away. The entire European Union put a ban and moratorium on the technology out of fears and concerns that society was expressing to the government and to the different regulators. So it is possible, and it happens. We have countless technologies that had incredible promise. Another one, plants. Many of you know drugs, biological drugs, biomolecules are very difficult to manufacture. There is technology that was being developed to allow plants to express proteins so that the plant would have the biological molecule expressed without chemical manufacturing. That technology similarly got restricted and banned. And why? Because researchers weren't stewarding it properly in regards to their field trials where they were testing it. So this happens an enormous amount of time. It's a long path for it being adopted. Its success will be dependent on responsible stewardship. Now, why do I say that? Because we see the winter coming on AI. You saw that curve. And the peak of those curves are amazing conversations about all the greatness that AI will have. Every technology has that. You start out with all the promise and all the wonderful things it can do. And then eventually people start looking at it with more concern. Sometimes those concerns are easily and quickly addressed. Sometimes they derail it. So we looked at the entire landscape of the US population and using some clustering technology that was advanced and could organically cluster the conversation without asking, what are they talking about? It's actually quite a novel technology developed at Carnegie Mellon, Princeton, and MIT. We implemented it. We took all the information, and what you're seeing are all the discussion topics and clusters among the US population by the level of emotionality, the sentiment, and the size of the discussion. And what you see is on the bottom right, all this great, pretty favorable conversation, machine learning, data analytics, clean diesel, and all sorts of other technologies, cloud, right? And then take a look at the top left, which represents one of the area of great emotion, great concern, and negativity. And you see this concept called digital ethics emerging. This is the topic, this is the cluster that will be core to either allowing AI to flourish or be derailed. And what's digital ethics? Now, David said I teach a class at WashU in the business school. And this is probably the hardest question to all the MBA students and the executive MBA students. What are ethics? And a good colleague of mine named David Messick, who is the head of the American Psychological Association and a chief editor of the magazine, I thought he put it perfect from a context of how we need to think about it. It's about an ethical dilemma, and the dilemma is you as business leaders and researchers have to choose between two rights. We're not talking about immorality and breaking laws and doing illegal activities. We're talking about the fact that you have to make a choice. You have two rights, a choice, and you have the power to decide about that choice, who wins and who loses. So let me give you an example. You're Uber. You write the code on your autonomous driving vehicle. And the code has to be written that someone has just jumped out in front of the autonomous driving vehicle. There's a passenger in the car, and someone has jumped out. The code, the math code, has to decide who lives, who dies. Someone is going to die. Digital ethics is about understanding how to make the decision between two rights, right? The right is someone should live. That's a right. But someone's going to benefit and someone's going to be harmed. That is an ethical dilemma on a code basis. This is what will potentially unravel the use of AI. How the code and the language you write based on the data you train it on, you end up allowing for decisions for the code to make as to who benefits and who gets harmed. It's a very emotional topic. It's one of the top in emotionality across the country. As you can see, that's in context with all other kind of discussions like opioid and all sorts of other different food and health and mental health and well-being topics. Now, some examples of that I just wanted to highlight for you to make it real. Amazon AI had to shut down their AI where they trained the data set for candidates to identify the ideal candidate for the positions and the openings they had. There was a problem. They didn't have enough data that was representative of different diverse backgrounds, including gender. So the code started always recommending males for every job because it had only that data. You know, I have always the expression, and it's kind of a funny one, a couple of colleagues have said it is, and I say it to you from a standpoint of your data collection, and that there's a story of a gentleman who lost his watch, and someone says, well, where'd you lose the watch? And he goes, I lost it across the street near that building. You know, well, why are you looking for it on the other side of the street? And he said, because the light is here. And the concept is that we tend to work with the data we have, not understanding the implications and the biases of that data. We look at what we have. And that brings in some pretty significant challenges into how we train our AI. And the Amazon AI is a good example of that. Uber, I just talked to you about those decisions. But then also that trade-off of ethical decisions is you have new novel technologies for implants in regards to different tools and different kind of devices. And yet, we know that they potentially have the risk of being hacked. And so you have people's lives who could be saved now, but you have the risk of them being hacked in the future. It's an ethical dilemma. Do you or don't you allow those devices to be implanted? Right? And similarly, you have the stop sign with technology where autonomous driving vehicles can read the sign. Here's the problem. There's millions of people that die each year from car accidents, an absolute disaster in regards to fatalities. And so you think of the benefit of autonomous driving vehicles, but here's a problem as well. You can actually interrupt that code so the car reads that stop sign, and with just those black and white little stickers on a sign, you corrupt the code and it actually says to go 80 miles an hour. You could save lives, but the technology still lacks the ability. It's a true dilemma. Now, I don't want you to leave on all the negatives. There's some fantastic work that's being done, and this is the promise that has to be stewarded, you know? DeepMind, Google DeepMind, Society for Good, clinicians predicting eye disease, right, to combat different elements as well as environmental issues. Neuritas, right, with bioactive peptide research to be able to learn which ones and benefit with incredible health benefits. Pause, where will potentially poachers go so they can protect wildlife? And then one a little bit more consumer-centric, Netflix, the colleagues I have there say, well, we make life better. You have better experiences, right? You get the right content, the right movie, the right story that makes you feel good for what you need at that time, right? A very different concept, but equally one that contributes well to society. And so addressing these fears, 3 key areas. I apologize for our link there. Lead responsibly. This is about those stewardship of the technology. What code of conduct do you have in the use of the technology? Those don't have to be organizational. They could be centric to your own values, your own self-reflection on how you're developing the code, how you're implementing the AI in different applications. What data are you using? Are you using is the data biased? These are all elements of ethics around the use of AI. Allow more openness and transparency. How did you come to it? What data did you use? What data are you collecting from consumers and customers such that you're developing these AIs? Are you giving them the ability to have transparency and control relative to how these elements and decisions are made? And by far, the best outcomes of AI is when it's combined with human intelligence and human decision making. You know, in fact, my belief is that data scientists, as you know, HBR and Davenport have said, you know, it's sexiest career, hardest to find. Actually, I believe the most difficult resource and expertise to find is not data science. It's decision science. Very difficult to translate all of that data into decision frameworks and actions that occur. And so the best outcomes for AI always bring together AI and HI, human intelligence. And so as we go on with this incredible outline and agenda of day that David and Cindy and the team have put together, it's just an incredible outline, technical in nature. I want you to think, as you're learning all this technology, to do incredible things with it in wonderful applications. How will you responsibly steward this technology so it can fulfill its promise and potential for business and society? And with that, I want to thank you and thank Dave for the opportunity to speak to you. As you can tell, I'm passionate about having this technology realize its potential, and I look forward to seeing all the incredible innovations that you bring in applications to do that. Thank you.